Alright, in my last video I was speaking about fear being the root of all sin. I included a PDF in that video which really summarized and brought what I was trying to say together as a PDF I made a couple years back. Anyway, in that PDF there's actually things mentioned which I'm actually going to be going through in the next couple videos anyway. However, I still recommend taking a look at that PDF. It's in the last video, fear being the root of all sin. Now, in this video, I'm going to be talking about handling temptation. Before I jump into how to handle temptation specifically, I just want to give a quick note about bondage. You see, there's a very big difference between being in bondage and having temptations. There are a lot of Christians today that are trying to resist and fight against sin, and they're still in bondage. They don't technically get temptations the biblical way temptations are described. For example, when one's in bondage, there isn't really very much time for temptation because they're pretty much falling into the sin immediately. Or they're resisting, and the temptation feels like this pressuring feeling that they cannot resist and they have no power. And they just feel like a slave, and then they go and do it, and they feel terrible. Now, what's very sad about this is I haven't heard very much preaching that actually helps people when it comes to bondage. And I'm talking about the circle of people I've seen preaching. Obviously, there must be people out there who deal with this. But I'm talking about within the circle of a lot of people who preach holiness. People tell people to repent, and telling someone to repent when they're a slave is stupid. Right? I mean, they want to repent, they don't know what to do. So I just want to make a quick note that if anyone feels like they just can't stop sinning, even though they want to, that's classified as bondage, and in this situation, you actually need to seek Jesus for deliverance. Deliverance can come in quite a many variety of ways. I shared how I was delivered from lust in my testimony. I mentioned other things I was delivered from as well, but I didn't go into explicit detail of the story behind each one. Essentially because once I got that first really big deliverance where Jesus had to speak to me, and then he showed up the next day and spoke to me in my spirit and broke the chains off. After that, simple wisdom and simple truth that Jesus gave me was enough to deliver me from all the other sins afterwards. So my recommendation to you is you seek Jesus. Whether you get a supernatural encounter, whether you get a revelation, whether you get a truth, whether you get healing, something inside of you changes where the chains break off and you feel it. This is not something I can easily describe. All I can really say is it is very spiritual. You feel a change in you, and usually the result is you now have a certain measure of power to say no. This time when you resist, you're not resisting feeling like you're a victim. You're resisting either feeling like you're exactly on the same par where you can hold off, or you're resisting and you're overtaking the enemy and he's fleeing. But if you feel like you're below the enemy, that means there's some form of deliverance that you need. And Jesus, it's usually his word that sends that deliverance. Okay, he speaks to you. There's other times where he could just take it off of you, you know. But the point is, there's a difference between being in bondage and then those who actually get legit temptations, which I'm about to go into in a moment. And I just wanted to make sure I take the time to let people know that if you feel like you can't stop sinning and you want to, do not fret, don't lose your mind, don't think it's over for you, you're done. And be careful of who you're listening to who's preaching, because they might be preaching holiness for hypocrites, as in they're targeting hypocrites and telling them they need to be holy and they need to be righteous and whatnot. And that's technically not you. If you're in slavery and you want out and you're having a hard time hearing people preaching, telling people they're going to go to hell if they don't stop, sinning is not going to help you, as I mentioned in the fear video, in the video before this one. What you need is just simply seeking Jesus and getting the deliverance, getting truth, getting wisdom, getting his word, or having him supernaturally just crush that devil. You know? So yeah, that's just the note on being in bondage. Now, when it comes to temptation, usually we experience heated temptations with something that we've actually been delivered from, or something we've never actually done yet. Bondage comes once we've already been sold as a slave to something, or we've been put into slavery to something. Temptation, on the other hand, tries to yoke us into bondage. It's either putting us into bondage for the first time, or trying to get us back into bondage after we've been delivered. A lot of people try to handle resisting sin and resisting temptation in a way that's not very efficient. You see, there's a parable that I had learned regarding sin and temptation, and the parable is likened to a tree. A lot of people try to resist sin by dealing with the sin itself. So they try not to do the act. And Jesus showed me that this is likened into trying to pick fruit off of a tree. This can become very tedious and very tiring very quickly. Paul in Romans chapter 8 kind of spoke about this, actually. He mentioned it. I mean, it is a method that you can use. It definitely can help at the beginning, but it's not going to help you overcome completely. As in, on the spot. There's more that needs to be applied. Paul mentioned that we're supposed to kill the evil deeds of the body. And it's funny because this was in Romans 8. In Romans 7, Paul made it clear that he was struggling. And he was speaking in present tense, so I'm just going to go based off the tense he was speaking in. He was speaking as though he still was struggling with the flesh. However, he at least knew what to do in beginning and overcoming. And what he was talking about in Romans 8 was plucking the fruit off the tree. Okay? Now, people who try and resist temptation and handle it this way, what they'll generally find is that they still get attacks in their mind. Their mind can still be a complete mess, but at least they're holding off on doing the physical action. And I did go through this. The next way of handling temptation, Paul also spoke about in Corinthians, talking about the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God for pulling down the strongholds, and he starts talking about holding thoughts captive. This is like another level of resisting temptation. Rather than dealing with the physical acts of sin, now we're trying to chop that tree down. We're going for the thoughts. And again, I went through this as well, where I then had to start learning how to take my thoughts captive and bringing them into obedience to Jesus. So a thought would come, I'd have to chase it down. Sometimes it felt like I had to chase it down, or other times I had to roll it off of me because it's trying to overtake me, and grab the bull by the horns, per se, and bring it into subjection and keep my thoughts along the holiness, the righteousness, the good things, the virtuous things, all the good things, and rather than giving into the thoughts of the evil things. This is a different way of handling temptation. This way is better than the first one. This is better than plucking the fruit off. This is cutting the tree down. But the situation is, I found that using this method, I still had situations where things would sprout back up again, and sometimes in different ways. The third way I noticed that Jesus had been dealing with me regarding handling temptation, Paul doesn't really give too much on this one. He mentions that God didn't give us a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind. In fact, the Bible doesn't speak too heavily on it the way that I'm saying it, but it does speak heavily on it in the aspect of talking about truth. The best way to handle dealing with temptation is receiving the truth that kills the lie. You see, as I mentioned in that last video, that thorough walkthrough with fear, I said that fear is the root of all sin, and I also mentioned that fear is actually the lie that causes us to be put into a mindset where we're trying to preserve ourselves or become selfish, and then sin is the very next thing that comes after that. If we nip those lies as soon as they begin to sprout, we're not even going to have to worry about the tree growing. We're not going to have to worry about the fruit. And I've experienced this in my past numerous times. I just didn't understand. There's one time where I fell into sin, and I went back to Jesus and I asked him what the deal was, because I already knew what to do, and Satan would just come and try and sway me. I'd give in, fall, realize, man, okay, I wasn't supposed to do this, and the commandment I didn't obey became very hazy. It was like as though Satan came and he stole the word from me, he stole the seed from me. I'd go back to Jesus for extra grace, and when Jesus spoke to me, one time he said to me straight, he's like, you don't like pornography. And I was like, yeah, you're right. He's like, okay, so why do you allow it in your mind? And I didn't realize, like, for some stupid reason, I didn't equate pornography, like the movies, and me thinking about just thoughts in my head to be the exact same. And when that clicked, not only did I get strength to say no, I hated the thoughts. It came with the whole package that just crushed everything. And then I was doing great for a small season there until Satan tried to find a new way to tempt me. So in this example, Jesus spoke to me and he gave me a truth that really helped me hold my guard against temptation. It helped me to be sustained, at least for a season. I didn't hold on to it. I was still learning. This is throughout that 4 years in my testimony where I was learning to overcome and resist and so on. It was a truth that Jesus gave me that helped me in this situation. Now, what I said earlier in previous videos is that fear is what you need to deal with. What Jesus said to me to help me in that situation wasn't actually a fear. My fear was fear of not getting married. And demons used to attack me really hard with that. And then they would use that fear to build other lies on top of it to then try and lead me into sin. Things got extremely complicated. So my advice to everyone who's going through temptation, obviously you need to go to Jesus and find out what to do. But number 2, you need to hold on to the truths that are given to you and make sure you get truths that target that lie, that target the fear, the root fear, or target the lies that defend that fear. And also target the suggestions that lead you into the wrong way of thinking. Or get wisdom, the truth, or revelation that reveals more to you about your situation that helps you come out of those temptations. Because sometimes you may not even realize. That the way you're thinking or what you're doing is causing the temptations to be a lot higher than they ought to be. In that example that I had just given you, it was fear of not getting married that was the fear that would pave the way for me to be open to the temptations and the suggestions to answer my problems with sin. I would have life situations pop up and other things pop up that would frustrate me, and then the answer would be go and do this sin to feel better. Or entertain these thoughts in your head. Now, Jesus did give me the truth that fought against those fears. The problem is, I had a problem with doubt. So that was also a battle that I had at the exact same time. That's what actually made this lust battle a lot more longer, or a lot more intense, is because I was getting attacked from both ends. Now, in between these situations, or in between these two struggles, there's also little bits of wisdom that Jesus was giving me, which was part of the example that I gave you, that helped me in the moment, even for a short time. But ultimately, when I overcame this particular struggle of this time, I had to learn to operate in the balance of believing the things that Jesus told me about the fears that I had, so I could overcome those lies. And at the same time, I had to also learn to obey the instructions he gave me to come out of temptation. And with that, he gave me supporting truths and supporting wisdoms and so on. Also, just to throw out there, with doubt, I had a fear about what I was seeing in the natural. I had a fear of my own perceptions, what I was perceiving. And I had to learn to let go of that and start trusting Jesus and just stop acknowledging what I saw and what I felt within my own life. And through that, I was able to then overcome those fears, and I was able to believe a lot better. And then that made everything else really easy as well. Hopefully that makes sense, and anyone who is struggling or battling with temptation, hopefully this kind of helps you with some extra tools to put in your belt in learning how to overcome your personal trials. The last thing I'm going to mention is just spiritual warfare. I highly encourage everyone to pray and ask Jesus about spiritual warfare. Spiritual warfare does not always have to be shooting guns and praying destruction and death upon demons, although that is very common and it still works. I just highly recommend everyone to ask Jesus about how you are supposed to properly wear the armor of God, wear the attitudes, the right attitudes and the right mindsets and holding the right truths and so on, and how to also offensively take action against the enemy who's attacking you. Spiritual warfare is important, in praying against the enemies that are attacking you and tempting you is important because it can wear them out. In fact, depending on where you are in your growth, it can completely destroy them. But make sure you're following Jesus' leading, because if you start attacking them and that's not what you're supposed to be doing at the time, they can wear you out. So I encourage you to seek Jesus about spiritual warfare. I'm not going to go into all of that right now, not in this video, and most likely not in this playlist. But I encourage you just to ask Jesus about it and let Jesus lead you in regarding how to handle spirits and handle the fight that you're in. And he'll guide you. He will guide you. And also, one other quick note on spiritual warfare: basic obedience, you just simply obeying Jesus, that goes a long way. In belief, those two, belief and obedience, they count as spiritual warfare. They're definitely tools or weapons. I encourage you to really hold on to those. Anything extra when it comes to praying, when it comes to fasting, when it comes to mindsets and all of that, really seek Jesus about it. And I wouldn't put your confidence and trust in warfare and the methods. I'm just saying that this is a great tool to use to really help you overcome. And especially when times are so hard as they are right now with so many trials, it really does help put things into perspective. Sometimes it takes some time. Sometimes you have to be honest. Sometimes you might have to be praying every day or every night for a month or two before you start even seeing anything. But I highly recommend seeking Jesus about that. So again, when it comes to bondage, seek Jesus for deliverance. It's really not too hard. Just believe, trust in Him. He will do it. Once you receive deliverance, you will generally know because there's a difference. There's something that has changed in you, even if it's a revelation, even if it's just the feeling of deliverance. Hold on to that and continue to grow and learn from Jesus to overcome temptation. As I mentioned, there's plucking the fruit off the tree, which can help. It can really help give you some room and some space to breathe. Then there's cutting down the tree, which is even better. But then going for that root fear, going for the root lie, that's the best method that I've found before even understanding this, and then coming to understanding it and applying it. And again, spiritual warfare is also something that I encourage people to really seek Jesus about in overcoming temptation and handling it. I'm going to end this video here. Like I said, I've been trying to keep these short, still a little bit longer than I wanted it, but I'm still trying to get enough information out there for you guys to be able to go back to Jesus. I don't really want to cut you guys short, even in making these videos short. But anyway, I'm going to end this video here. My next video, that's going to be on a controversial subject. My next video is going to be on the fact that we are not born sinners. So before anyone picks up stones and starts throwing the stones at me just because of the title alone, I do recommend watching the video because I use the scriptures to show that we are not actually born sinners. We all fall away. We all are led astray. But babies are not born guilty of sin and guilty of hellfire. And they're not born naturally rebellious against God. That's not how God has made us.